All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of To Your Point, our roundtable discussion that we do periodically here on the Suns Network to talk about UCF, UCF adjacent sports, college athletics, and the like. And of course, we bring in some folks who cover the conference. In this case, we're doing a lot of Big 12 stuff on this particular episode. And I'm happy to welcome, I will throw out our first topic and bring each of our panelists in one at a time as we do that. So first up, our first question is going to be, where's the Big 12 position in the landscape of college sports, and how would you grade Brent Yormark's tenure as commissioner so far? And first, we're going to go to John Kurtz. He brings you the Open for Business Big 12 newsletter, streams the John Kurtz Show twice weekly on YouTube, also former BYU tight end who is in that school's Hall of Fame. John, welcome. Glad to have you here.
Yeah, I have to chuckle there for a moment because that screenshot of BYU former tight end is actually. So I went on BYU TV. I am in no way a former BYU tight end, but I went on I went on BYU TV and I was following Brian Billick, who of course is the Super Bowl winning head coach and a Hall of Fame BYU tight end. And they didn't get the graphic change, so I said, "Hey, this is my only shot. I played B team middle school football. This is my only shot to be a Hall of Fame tight end." So I took it and ran with it. But
okay. I'll have the executive producer mark that down as my first error of the program.
No, I don't say that to call you out. I don't want anybody actually thinking that I had any football lore to my name. I got a communications degree from K-State. So anyway, but as far as the Big 12's place in college football, it's kind of a complex thing because like right now we're having this debate over the playoff format, right? And I think the crux of that issue is whether or not the Big 12 wants to actually codify that they are a second-class citizen in college football, which is what the 4-4-2-2 model would really do. And I think right now Brett Yormark and the ACC and Jim Phillips, for that matter, are really trying to stand their ground on saying, hey, we're not going to just totally put that ceiling on us right now. Officially, maybe you're going to force it down our throats, but we're not going to do that right now. I do think, and even Brett Yormark has admitted this when he was on, I think it was the Triple Option podcast the other day on Fox. Like, hey, like I'm a realist. Like I understand where we're at right now, which clearly the Big 12 is below the Big 10 and the SEC. The question I think on that is, where are they at with the ACC? Because the ACC as it is has better football brands. There's no doubt about that. And Clemson, they may be kind of a trendy dark horse national championship pick this year, for instance. They've got better brands there, but they're also a ticking time bomb here over the next 5 years, basically, to where once the exit fee goes down enough, you're going to start losing those big brands. So how do you value the stability that the Big 12 has versus the brand advantage that the ACC has? I would just say no matter how you define it, I think Brett Yormark has done about as good a job as you could have asked for. I mean, I grade him kind of around an A- at this point because I think he's left some to be desired when it comes to just like running the organizational stuff of running a conference. People have been frustrated with how he's divvied up who you're playing twice in basketball or the 3 out of every 4 years thing in football. And the tiebreaker deal a couple of years ago, I don't think that was a very good look. But the big picture stuff, like getting the TV deal, jumping in front of the Pac-12, getting the 4 corner schools, like all the big picture stuff that really matters, I think he's done as good a job as you possibly could to best position the Big 12 wherever you think it actually lands.
Okay. All right, next up, we bring you a proud UCF alum who's covered college football for several years, from Northern Illinois to the Group of 5 FIU, and now is the beat reporter for Longhorns football and basketball for Horns 24/7. We welcome Eric Henry. And Eric, I'm very curious to your response, having watched Texas transition from the Big 12 to the SEC and getting your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback off of John before I kind of give the perspective of Texas transitioning from the Big 12 to the SEC. I'm inclined to agree. When you take a look, I think it's not necessarily a secret. It's the SEC, the Big 10, and everyone else, right? And John said previously, it's a matter of how you kind of measure up the Big 12 in juxtaposition to the ACC. I would give Brett Yormark a B+, and now I'm going to take it from totality of not just football, basketball as well. I think he's done a good job with that league, and quite frankly, I think college basketball, men's basketball, is probably the saving grace for the Big 12 as far as some bargaining pieces. That's a league that typically can compete with the SEC in terms of getting double-digit bids and sending teams to the NCAA tournament. You can't forget that factor. But, when you take a look at the college ball playoff and the format and evolving, it's one of these things that I've always found super interesting, right? I've never quite understood. And, Jeff, you talked about my background covering Group of 5 football for several years before I had a chance to make the move and join 247 Sports. The thing is this, right? And I did the math. You got 21 games in the now 11-year history of the college football playoff that have been decided by 3 scores or more. So don't tell me that, the SEC or Big Ten schools have some birthright or more entitled to, more bids because that's the strongest football. There's the idea of parity, right? That's a myth. You've got 6-8 teams that are at the top and the rest are trying to compete. So that's always kind of annoyed me, and seeing, this shift to, kind of give the SEC and Big Ten more leverage. I don't understand that because there's no proof over the past decade that they're warranted of that outside of a handful of teams. But like I said, the grade I would give Brett Yormark is a B+, and really quick on Texas making the transition. I don't think there's, you can't really deny the fact that the Big 12 needed Texas and Oklahoma more than those schools needed the Big 12. And quite frankly, a lot of the questions or one of the questions I get routinely is, was Texas SEC ready? Well, you take a look, some of the biggest games of the year, football, softball, other sports, Texas was involved. And this isn't me being, some Texas elitist. The proof is there to show that I think the SEC needs Texas more than even Texas needs the SEC at this point outside of the brand.
All right. And now we bring in, for his third appearance on this program, the man who covers all things UCF for the Orlando Sentinel. Welcome back, Matt Murschel.
Thank you. I'm like the cleanup hitter on this topic again, so I get to come in here and find it, kind of throw out my opinion here after that. I agree with both Eric and John. I mean, I think if we look back at where the Big 12 was, 4 or 5 years ago, I mean, we wouldn't even be talking about this league if it wasn't for some of the things they were able to do, whether it was, Bob Bowlesby coming in at the end of his career there, and Brett Yormark coming in, bringing on new teams, bringing on, restructuring the league, finding a way to take, a new media rights deal, stepping in front of the Pac-12, really kind of helping getting this league to where it is right now. I mean, we would be talking about, who knows, maybe it'd be the Pac-16 or 18 at that point. But I think it's important for this league, as we've talked about, to make sure that they find themselves in that number 3 spot. They got to get above the ACC. They've got to find a way. Like, they're not going to be able to compete with the SEC and the Big Ten, and I think they know that. But they got to find themselves as the third best conference out there right now. And I think it's important for them. And I think you've seen what Brett Yormark has been able to do over the last couple of years since he's taken over to kind of help put themselves in that position, whether it's with basketball, whether it's with international games, whether it's just the way they're trying to, go into New York and do some stuff with their basketball there, whether it's what they're doing with football, the WWE, all these things that they're kind of tying in here to try to make sure that, this league, really is out front with the brand. And I think, if I was going to give Brett a grade, it would probably be an A-, because again, he was able to do a lot of things. I think what's helped him tremendously throughout this process is he's not a college guy. This is a guy who came from the business side of things. A guy walked in and said, listen, I'm going to come with a fresh new approach, and we're going to try to do some things. And maybe it works and maybe it doesn't. Going after Gonzaga, for instance, for basketball at one point, that was something I think it was kind of far reach, but I think he felt like this could make the move. So I think there are things he's done well, and I think there are things that obviously he's maybe botched a little bit, fumbled a little bit, just because first-time commissioner, those kind of things are going to happen. But overall, I think where this league is a lot stronger than it would have been 3 or 4 years ago when we first started up seeing this league come together.
Yeah, I would agree, and I would have to say A- would probably be what I would put out there as well. And look, a few years ago when word was that Texas and Oklahoma are going to the SEC, people were thinking, oh, that's it for the Big 12, right? I mean, that was almost like considered a death blow. But he went out, he got more teams, brought in some top flight, group of 5 teams. He picks up from the Pac-12 and refortifies with volume, and I think that was a great thing. And yeah, Eric, you're right on the money there as far as basketball goes. I mean, it was already a great basketball conference, and I think it's gotten just better with all the additions. So And I like the fact that Brett Yormark is a little bit of a different, he's kind of a maverick a little bit. And I like the fact he's willing to think outside the box and do different things. And he's always very positive and very confident. It's funny because like I always look at Greg Sankey and think, he's, to me, comes across a little bit of a whiner when he's talking about defending his conference. So I kind of like the approach that Brett Yormark takes as far as that is concerned. All right, topic number 2, and this feels very much like Match Game. The House settlement is blank. Eric, we'll give you first shot at this one.
Sure. The House settlement is incomplete. That's what it is. In my mind, yes, it is a step in a direction, but it doesn't really fortify many things. And here's the fact of the matter, right? Until we reach a point where we're talking about employee and employer, we're going to be dealing with a lot of the variables we are now. I will point out, in my mind, I think the number one factor, number one kind of thing coming out of the House settlement that a lot of fans should be focusing on, so much focus has been paid to, the scholarship limits and, the funding, what you can do. Fair market value, right? Now, for those who don't know, right, some of these deals, these NIL deals now have to pass clearinghouse, and the phrase is fair market value. Well, how do you define that? Right? I'll give you an example. You look at, the great pitcher, Texas Tech, Naijiri Canaday, right? She signed a $1 million deal under the old structure with NIL, now re-ups for another $1 million and potentially more. And you would say, well, what is fair market, right? Is fair market being defined as what is the market of softball players? Because then that would not be fair. She'd be far and away exceeding the rest of the market, right? Now, is fair market the value she's brought to Texas Tech? I would say she's underpaid, right, in that regard, if you're looking at fair market. But the number one thing that I take away from this is that it's incomplete. Yes, it does widen the gap between the SEC and the Big Ten and some of the other Power 4 programs, and the Group of 5, unfortunately, is going to get left behind in this, but it's incomplete. And until we get to a structure in which we're talking about employee and employer, you're going to see a lot of these things challenged in court, and I think you're starting to see that already.
All right, John, what's your take?
Yeah, I would say, filling in the blank, I would say it's something that's in need of congressional help and maybe more. We really don't know exactly how this is going to go to the point of fair market value. I mean, I think this could have a really wide-reaching type of effect, and it will affect, if you're thinking about it from a Big 12 perspective, it could affect teams in the league very differently because, Eric just brought up Texas Tech, right? I mean, it was reported within the last couple of weeks, I think Brandon Marcello had it, that Texas Tech spent $55 million on its student athletes this past year. And look at their men's basketball team, came within an eyelash of the Final Four. Their football team just put together the number 1 class in the transfer portal, depending on where you look. And then softball, I mean, it's caused a giant uproar within the entire sport, how well they've done in the transfer portal overall by flexing their spending power there. So Texas Tech literally is taking this as an opportunity to recruit in a way that they never would be able to if things come through the way that everything is like written out with these rules for the House settlement, and we're kind of back to like a level playing field, basically, in terms of how much you can spend, something close to that. I mean, Texas Tech would never be able to, no offense to the Red Raiders, be able to recruit at that type of level, but they are utilizing the edge that they have in this free-for-all era. So if fair market value, if the first time they deny something for fair market value and you get a lawsuit and there's no congressional help, I mean, that could change things. Does this, as many people predict, just send us back to an era where people are going to be passing out money under the table and just not reporting some of these deals to the clearinghouse, and Deloitte wouldn't even have a chance to look at it? That's another way this could possibly go. There's just a million different directions. I think in general, Big 12 athletic directors like Travis Goff at Kansas was on Twitter vehemently defending this thing. I think because it's like wishful thinking for him. He's got a football stadium to fund. He's got a blue blood basketball program and a resurgent football program. I think they're like running out. They're tapping their donors dry right now, and they feel like we can't keep up with this at the pace that it's going right now. So for most Big 12 schools, I guess it's probably better if this works out and puts somewhat of a cap on it moving forward. But there doesn't seem to be a lot of optimism within the sport that that's really going to happen and that schools like Texas Tech will be slowed down. So I think it'll just be really fascinating to watch how this all goes. I mean, I guess fascinating, potentially frustrating, whatever superlative you want to throw in there, because college athletics is just so crazy these days.
All right, Matt, how would you fill in the blank?
I'm going to use the word frustrating. Frustrating is what the house settlement is, as both my colleagues have just talked about. I mean, every step, you talk to athletic directors, you talk to coaches, you talk to even football players or baseball players or athletes about the house settlement and what's involved with NIL and revenue sharing and everything going on, and they'll just tell you how it's just frustrating at this point. You know, that they're not sure exactly how things are going. You know, every time we think you get a handle on something, you think this is going to be the way it's going to be done, then you know, a state decides to file some sort of lawsuit, or the state does some sort of new, you know, rules that try to go to change it, to make it so their state doesn't get impacted. Their state schools don't get impacted by this in a difficult way. It's just one of those things where I think eventually we'll get on to a point where everything will be better than it is right now. But right now, I mean, it's just trying to figure all this out. I mean, how much how schools are raising the money, how schools are trying to make cutbacks in some sports, but not in others. How some schools are going to fund, you know, their Olympic sports maybe compared to the revenue generating sports. I mean, those are issues. The NIL issue, as they've just talked about, as John and Eric have talked about, is really, you know, confusing right now. And you're wondering, wait till we start getting these giant deals that go through there, and Deloitte comes in and says this isn't going to work. This isn't going to be right. We're going to take this from your cap, and all of a sudden we get cap issues coming in and all that. I just, to me right now, and I've gotten this from fans who've told me over the last couple months, I don't want to hear about this anymore. I don't want to keep reading about this anymore. It's just frustrating. I mean, it's a part of the sport that has really turned people off on college athletics right now, and I think it's unfortunate, but it is part of the business. We all know this because we cover it on a daily basis.
You know, the word I came up with was unimaginable, because I couldn't comprehend 20 years ago. We're talking about the kind of money that's being paid over the table, you know, where 20 years ago, you know, you were in trouble for buying a kid a Big Mac, right? It's like that's a long stretch between what it was and what it is now. And kind of a follow-up question to this, I mean, do you find like the more we know, the more we don't know? I mean, it seems to scramble because it's a very fluid situation.
I mean, I can, you know, kind of jump in there, Jeff. I would agree. You know, I will say one of the things, I know Matt used the word frustrating. One of the things that was frustrating, you know, for people like us as reporters is, you know, I asked Steve Sarkisian, you know, hey, what are your thoughts on, you know, the pending House settlement? And Steve just was like, I'm not talking hypotheticals. Right. It's like, Steve, it's not a hypothetical. It's coming. But the reason I mentioned that is because, yeah, you know, you have, whether it's coaches or players or, you know, Jeff, you made the point that you wouldn't have imagined that in a previous era, we would talk about this kind of money. I wouldn't have imagined that I'd be talking to agents about players. Right. Like it's all very much up in the air and confusing. And it feels, even at, like I said, it feels incomplete because I don't think we truly have resolution.
Yeah, and then like the way
I also think too.
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I also think too that, you know, I mean, we're in this position now where, you know, we're like, I wouldn't have thought 2 days ago when the Florida Board of Governors decides to come out with this amendment now that, okay, now public institutions can use some of this non-auxiliary or this auxiliary funds to start funding their revenue sharing, and then all of a sudden you start getting into that, and I got people. I mean, we're looking at every little, you know, nook and cranny to try to find some money to help fix this problem. They think. And try to get on the maybe above, you know, everyone else when it comes to it. And it's just, I mean, I'm blown away. I mean, I agree with Eric. I mean, you know, I talked to a coach and I don't want to talk about hypotheticals. That's the phrase they love. I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals. Well, it's not a hypothetical. It is a reality. This is coming down the pipeline. It's an 18-wheeler coming down the road, and you're going to have to race for it because it's going to be here. And I think that's why we're seeing so many of these coaches, especially, leaning on GMs, leaning on specialty people and their staffs to make sure they can handle these questions, because some cases they don't even know. I mean, they're just trying to figure out what the AD tells them, and they hope that's going to help them out.
John, you got anything to add to that?
I think it's totally valid. I mean, like, there have just been so many different ripple effects to all of this. Like, for instance, you know, I mean, I'm in Kansas City here. I covered K-State full time for 10 years. I mean, Chris Kleiman just went on a rant the other day about like the roster limits that are coming into play with all this too, because he hates it. I mean, the coaches don't like that they were having to, well, it was just so wildly mismanaged, right? They made cuts. Literally, Chris Kleiman made about 20 cuts of guys that were like walk-on caliber players that he really didn't want to have to tell them that they couldn't play there. And then the next day it came out, they were like, hey, actually, you could grandfather these guys in. The roster limits aren't going to be stringent. I mean, it's just been such a wild process with all this, and stuff changes seemingly like every day. So that back to the frustrating point there, the word thrown out that it's been frustrating. I mean, I think the coaches, I'm sure, would be right on board with using that as the terminology here for all of this too, because there's just been so much of this that's been up in the air for so long, and has really screwed with a lot of guys in the process.
All right, so now let's take a little halftime break in our show. We'd like to call this little game Rank 'em. Matt's very familiar with this, but Eric and John, I hope you'll have fun participating. And basically, I'm picking a topic for you guys to rank, and I've asked you guys to name your top 3 summer activities. Matt, lead us off.
Well, I think for me, my top 3 is I enjoy reading. Well, I know it's one of the top things I like to do, but I don't get a chance much during the season. I think both Eric and John you don't get much of a chance to sit around and read books. So that's one of my top summer activities. The second is I don't get much chance to watch a lot of television or movies during the season. So I'm usually trying to catch up on all my streaming, trying to get all the shows. I mean, I just watched the Captain America movie that was out 6 months ago. I just got a chance to watch that the other day. I'm just trying to catch up with everyone because, I mean, spoilers are always out there on the internet, but I'm always trying to make sure I can avoid that. And then for 3, my third most is obviously what we talked about earlier was food. I'm always out on the road. I'm always out trying to find places to go eat. It's a chance for my wife and I to get out and maybe, sit down and have a meal and not worry that my phone's going to buzz and I'm going to find out that some other person is committed or, coach is leaving or whatever's going on. So those are really my top 3 summertime activities, but they can also be used any time of the year, I guess.
Yeah. But, it's always nice to have that window of opportunity that you're not normally afforded, for sure. All right, John, what are your 3?
I love that from Matt. I mean, that is such a good sports reporter answer, man. Just doing the basic things that we can't do when the season's going on. I was trying to keep it a little more summer. I mean, look, you can tell by my complexion, you wouldn't think I'm a guy that's spending a lot of time by the pool, but I actually do enjoy being out at the pool quite a bit. I just have to, bathe in sunscreen before I go out there, but definitely enjoy hanging out by the pool, sometimes reading, just relaxing. I would say number 2, the grill gets a lot of use during the summer. Now that's not specifically summer, but it gets the most use in the summer. I'm no expert out there, but I definitely enjoy dabbling and taking some stabs at it. And number 3, I'm kind of going reverse here of what Matt did, where it's getting away from all the sports stuff. This is because it's nostalgic to me, and I thought about it because I bought some this week. But when you go buy the college football preview magazines in the summer, that takes me back to being a kid, going and getting the Lindy's, the Athlon, Phil Steele, whatever it is, pick your poison or get all 3. It's crazy. They're like $25 at this point, which is kind of wild to me, but I got to do it for the nostalgia hit of what it reminds me of being a, middle school kid being pumped to go get those mags. Yeah.
Love that. All right, Eric, how about your 3?
Yeah, I'll bring us home. And I've got kind of a hybrid of Matt and John's answer. So number 1, as you referenced when you're introducing me, Jeff, I'm a born and raised Floridian, went to UCF, and, I left to obviously take the shop. I don't get a chance to see family or friends, and the amount of, weddings, baby showers, all those things that I've missed, over the time I've been, decade been covering college sports. I try to cram all of it into 10 weeks. And luckily the folks at 247 allow me 10 weeks to say, hey, whatever you need to do, you can do it from home as long as you're still, riding and whatnot. So I use this time. I'm currently sitting in a lovely hotel right outside of Port Charlotte because my mother lives here and my sister and her significant other took the other room in the house. So I lost out, and the lowly journalist will use some of those precious Marriott points that I have accumulated to crash in a hotel here. So that's the first thing. The second thing for me is, Matt mentioned being a foodie. I'm also a foodie, but I worked in, F&B. Once, I realized the NFL wasn't need of 5'9" linebackers from, JU. and decided that, all right, I'm probably need to, use this other skill in life to make it. I paid my way through college working in F&B, right, and hospitality and working in bars. So if I could just go out and get a good cocktail, a good rooftop, a good beach bar, anything where I can just get outside and have a nice drink, that's always enjoyable. And the third thing for me definitely is just getting a chance, when I'm home, go to a Rays game. I'll try to go to any game I can because that fan muscle is completely turned off. My friends hate the occasional Lightning game I get a chance to go to with them. They hate going to games with me because it's like you don't remember what it's like to be a fan anymore. And I have to kind of tap into that and remember, like, okay, I can actually cheer and act like I'm excited to be here instead of being in a press box, which I'm sure Matt and John have been to Iowa State, Jack Trice Stadium, my favorite announcement there. If you want to cheer, go outside, get a ticket. It's my favorite announcement there at Iowa State. But yeah, I've completely lost that muscle. So I enjoy just going to a baseball game and just being a fan for once.
All right. So I like some of the commonality here. So food is obviously a part of that. I'm with you, John. Grilling season is the summer activity for me. So I definitely work out the grill a little bit there. Baseball games is on my list too, whether it's minor league here in Florida. I just took a trip to Atlanta last month, so I like to get out to some baseball games during the summer. And my top one is relaxing at the beach. My wife and I like to go over to Treasure Island. I can soak in the Gulf of Mexico for 2-3 hours at a time. It's such a relaxing getaway. So yeah, I think we all kind of had a little line of thread of commonality through our top 3 on that. So good stuff there. All right, so let's get back to the sports topics, and we've got some here we come again stories. Who will have more success in their second go round? Scott Frost at UCF or Rich Rodriguez at West Virginia? And our order goes to John.
Yeah, I saw this on the outline. I was like, oh man, UCF audience is going to hate me on this one, but I've got to go Rich Rod. Now I will also say that when this happened, right, both of these hires happened very close to each other. I was thinking maybe I'm just a hater on this. I can't get over this topic. I'm a K-State guy. When Bill Snyder came back for the second time, I got drilled in the K-State Collegian. I wrote a column, the student newspaper there, about how I thought it was a terrible idea and it would never work. And 3 years later, he had them ranked number 1 in the country. So what do I know, UCF fans, about this topic? But I just look at it, I'm like, Scott Frost had one amazing year, right? I mean, obviously it was an incredible season. The rest, I mean, there's a 500-ish season at UCF, and then he was 10-26 in the Big Ten at Nebraska. I just feel like we have so much track record on him as an FBS head coach, and there's been one above average season. Now that's me looking at it from afar. I'm not intimately familiar with all of the details of what happened there at UCF, but it was just so bad at Nebraska. I understand he did kind of the rehab tour to get back on track with his coaching career before he's here. But I just don't feel like I've seen enough of him being an above average to good coach at this level to feel extremely confident about it. Now, I'm not extremely confident in Rich Rod either, but at least with Rich Rod, it's like there's been this long track record of a lot of success, definitely some downs, obviously the Michigan period being very bad. But if you want to call Nebraska and Michigan a wash with those two guys, I mean, Rich Rod did win 10 games at Arizona. He won 9 games 3 years in a row at Jacksonville State, which is still kind of in the current environment. Obviously, you're not dealing with NIL at the level that you're going to deal with it at West Virginia. But the other thing I would say, and this is, again, where I'm not familiar enough with what's going on at UCF NIL-wise, but just I have enough friends that have covered West Virginia that keep me pretty plugged in there, and it does sound like Rich Rod has a lot of NIL support to back him, like they're really stepping up to try and make that happen. So I feel pretty confident that the resources are there if Rich Rod can coach. So I would go a slight lean to him in West Virginia there.
All right, Eric, how about you?
Yeah, this one probably isn't going to earn me any brownie points with the alma mater here, but I'm inclined to go Rich Rod. Here's why. First off, I think you have to define success, right? And to John's point, you have to look at Scott Frost's career in totality. And I'm not even going to shade him for the Nebraska thing, right? I felt like that was an opportunity. If you know the details behind it, of course, going back, the prodigal son, his parents, so on and so forth, I understood why he had to take the job. However, Scott Frost has yet to show that he can be a successful FBS head coach without Mackenzie Milton under center, not as quarterback's coach, but under center, right? I mean, we haven't seen that. And you look back at it, and we're almost a decade removed from that time. College football's changed so much over the past decade, but you haven't seen that steady level of success. You're talking about Rich Rodriguez, who you can go back to his time at Glenville State, right? I mean, the prodigal son. I can't remember if Rich Rod is from West Virginia, but I know he spent a lot of time in that area, has done it at various places. I don't think the Jacksonville State thing, as someone who covered Group of Fives in Conference USA, don't sleep on that. That was a good FCS program under John Gross for many years, but to have the type of success he had at Jacksonville State, that shows something. So it's not that I'm down on Scott Frost and the hire. I just feel like you have more of a track record, and I think you have to define success. You know, when I was going to UCF, graduated 2015, I remember when the Beef O'Brady's Bowl was a nice year. Obviously, of course, I was there for the Fiesta Bowl year as a student, but it is the standard, and, you know, Matt's probably more equipped to answer this, having covered the program for the past, half decade longer. What is the standard for success at UCF, right? I know it's not what Gus Malzahn did. I feel confident in saying that, but is it, it certainly can't be college football playoff or bust. So you have to define success. But given where we are right now, I'm more inclined to lean towards Rich Rodriguez.
All right, Matt.
Yeah, I'm probably going to at least initially go with Rich Rodriguez, just starting out, because I think, again, as everyone has talked about, I think his body of work, what he's been able to do, throughout his career, I think there's a level of success I think he'll have maybe a lot quicker than maybe Scott Frost will. I think down the road, I mean, if everything can kind of get back to the where it was that Scott was like when he was here for those 2 short years, I think there's an opportunity to have success. I mean, listen, the difference from when Scott was here and what I've seen from that time and from the first 5 or 6 months he's been here now, there's a lot of similarities. I mean, listen, the idea of building a familiar relationship, the players feeling like this is a family, really talking of buying into chemistry, really buying into what they wanted, like the coaches really being a bond of that. I think that they'll have some success down the road if they can continue that. But again, like Eric and John have pointed out, I mean, Scott's overall track record is not that great. So, I mean, I think at some point he could get there. And again, defining success, is it going to be enough to compete in the Big 12? To be a top tier Big 12 team year in and year out, or do you need to win the Big 12 once in a while? Do you need to get into the college playoff once to maybe make that statement? I mean, that's going to be the challenge. I also think with West Virginia and Rich Rod, I think they've been around for a while. They've been in the Big 12 for a while. They understand exactly what it's going to take to get there to compete in that level. Whereas UCF, I'm not taking anything away from what we haven't seen that yet. In the first 2 years. So it's got to get to the point where they can get their feet under the ground. Now they're getting the full media right revenue share. I think that's going to help them out in a lot of ways. And then now you've got what's going on with revenue sharing and the House settlement and everything like that. How does that kind of be incorporated? So I think initially Rich Rod, in my mind, wins this for having some success, but I think Scott has opportunities. It's just whether or not they can kind of carry that over the next 5 or 6 years.
Yeah, I've been known to say often that I'm not a big fan of 2.0s because I don't think they work very often. John, you mentioned obviously Bill Snyder had success there. I guess you could say Greg Schiano's had a little bit of success, but it's not as good as the first time around. So that overall concept to me, I'm not generally a big fan of. Obviously, Frost returning is such a big feel-good story to the Orlando area. I mean, you can't deny that in any way, shape, or form. I would tend to go with Rich Rod only because I think West Virginia, he inherited a better shape than what Scott Frost did. I mean, you can, granted, West Virginia was in the middle of the pack of the Big 12, but they were better than UCF in conference play last year. So I would just kind of give the edge there. I mean, if we want to stretch this out a little bit and say, okay, what does it look like this year? Do you think that equation changes over the course of 3 or 4 years if they have success?
I think that if UCF can get some success, I mean, again, we're talking about defining success. What is success this year for UCF? I mean, success to me, maybe if you get to a bowl game. I mean, I think bowl eligibility at 6 wins to me would be a huge successful season for them based on the turnover on the roster, based on what, we saw last year. I think that would be huge for them. If they get past that 6-win mark, I think everything's gravy moving forward. But I also think, to me, this year is more about, I see a lot of similarities with the 2016 season for this year, where you're coming off a really bad year. Granted, it wasn't a winless season like it was in 2015, but you're coming off a really bad year. Now you come into a season where, okay, you can kind of start to get the foundation going. Can you build some players? Can you get them there? Can you keep them there? And that's really a big component as well. Can they keep the roster not as fluid as it was over the last couple of years? Because if they can, I think then they can have some success maybe over the next 3 or 4 years. But that's a lot of ifs, a lot of if and buts, as we like to say. So we'll see what happens there.
Yeah. And also, Rich Rod was gone a lot longer from West Virginia than Scott Frost was from UCF too.
Well, and I still really believe in the upside of UCF's program as a whole. I mean, just because of the talent base that you're around. And I mean, look, like Gus Malzahn was recruiting pretty well there. It's not like that can't be done. I mean, we've definitely seen that. So, and we've seen Scott Frost obviously do it at a very high level there before. So don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm somebody that's been very, very bullish on the long-term upside of UCF and the things everybody talks about and knows, obviously, just its youth as a program in general at this level. So yeah, if you get the momentum going, I mean, I could definitely, Scott Frost is still a pretty young dude, I mean, I think that helps. I think he's got some real recruiting chops and potential there. I could see this really start to build if you, step one, I think like Matt mentioned, get back to bowl eligibility. And that's where some of this is a little bit different. Like West Virginia, I mean, they've kind of been at that like bowl eligibility plateau for a while, but that's what they're sick of, right? They got sick of Neil Brown being kind of a 500 coach. So they're going to want more quickly to ascend beyond that. Whereas Scott Frost probably has a little bit more of a runway to get there in his situation right now.
Would you agree with that, Eric?
I would. And that's what I was saying, excuse me, talking about defining success, right? And, I know Neil Brown now is a special assistant to Steve Sarkisian at Texas. That's what landed him here. It's just kind of treading water, right? Not getting that quarterback situation right is amongst things is what's kind of landed him here. Now at UCF, and again, like I said, when I was a student, the Fiesta Bowl year was there, but also, making the Beef O'Brady's Bowl, the St. Pete Bowl. It's had 10 different names, but that was a success, right? To me, I think it all depends on what success is. I would say, I think, and I would be inclined to agree with Matt, year one bowl game, that's anything else is gravy. If you can get, 7, 8, 9 wins, that's gravy. But as time goes on, it's just kind of figuring out what it is. And also to the point Matt was making, West Virginia has more of a sustained history of success in the Big 12, or even going back to their days, prior in the Big East, right? UCF still trying to find their footing in the Big 12. I think that's important.
All right, so let's move to our next topic, number 4. And doing a lot of rankings in this program tonight. What is most important to be successful in college athletics? And here are those categories: recruiting, facilities, NIL/money, coaching, or conference/school legacy. Eric, what do you think?
This one I was really torn on because I can make the case for each of them, right? So even though I'm going to go 1 through 5, I don't think you really it's a very small margin between each. I'm going to go with NIL and money 1. The reason I'm going for that, and I'm going to answer this question from the perspective of UCF, roster continuity is so important. I think especially for a UCF. If you're a Texas, right, you're going to be able to get 4-star and 5-star recruits year in, year out. If you're a UCF, maintaining a measure of roster continuity, and what that partially is going to take is money, is so key. If I can at least get a recruit and know that I'm going to get him at least through sophomore year, ideally junior year, that's great. I can work with that, right? But if I'm having to turn over the roster, and the school I covered, for example, FIU, in the last 5 years and since the transfer portal era, they lost 37 kids to Power 5 programs, right? The 5 years, my final 5 years covering them. Like, you can't maintain that at a group of 5, and even a UCF can't. So I'm going to go NIL funding 1. I'm going to say coaching 2, recruiting 3, facilities 4, and then conference, legacy 5. Just really quick on the conference legacy thing. Yes, I do think the SEC, for example, covering Texas is a selling point, right? And of course, the Big 12 is certainly better to be in the Big 12 than it is being the American, right? But at this point, especially with the amount of money that is going to be injected in college sports, I don't think that's as pertinent, right? Look at the kid who signed with BYU for $3-4 million, right? It's not like he's playing in the SEC. Granted, the Big 12 still a prominent basketball league, but he's not, playing at Duke or North Carolina, for example, right? So I think there's a very small margin between each, but that's how I rank them.
Okay, Matt, what do you think?
Well, I'm going to go same. My number 1 is probably money and NIL. I mean, just in today's day and age, if you asked me this question 10 years ago, 10 years ago, Matt would have probably said, well, recruiting would be, the number 1 or coaching would be number 1. I think now you got to say NIL and money. I mean, we've seen that just based on how programs have just been, decimated in some ways with the transfer portal and NIL and how front loading and, how that's gone on over the last couple months, so I think to me that's really honestly really important for them. I think it's in the case of UCF, for instance, why it was so important for them to start to get that full share of revenue from the Big 12, because they felt like they were still playing with American Athletic Conference money, and it just wasn't able to kind of contend really. You look at the when you look in the Big 12. I think second to me is coaching. I do think coaching is very important still. I think finding the right coach, the coach that players want to play for, and then are willing maybe to take a little bit of a discount to play for a guy, maybe because they feel like they're going to get that way. We saw a little bit of that last year at UCF. Not taking anything away from Gus, but I don't think necessarily the players that were on the team were as bought into Gus maybe as they were a couple of years before that. And so I think that was a huge kind of a deal. Now we're seeing how Scott Frost now coming in has gotten a lot of buzz for some of these players. Now, if he gets wins on the field, I think that's going to also help him out as well. I think recruiting is going to be my number 3. Again, you still got to recruit, but that also ties into number 1 with NIL and money. So I still think you have to recruit really well. I think facilities are obviously going to be a big deal. Kids are always impressed by whatever the new latest trend is. If it's the new locker rooms, if it's a video game room, whatever it's going to be, I still think they're great. And then my last one is the conference affiliation. That kind of the history, that kind of thing. I just don't think nearly as many players today are as impressed necessarily with what am I playing at? What's the history of the school? What have they been able to do? I spoke to a lot of recruits over the last couple months who are coming here, who are from the Northeast, and you ask about UCF, and I said, "What do you know about UCF?" And the first thing it says, "Well, I remember that 2017 season." And it's like, all right, well, that's one, but there's not a lot of history there that they gravitate towards. So again, money rules as it has for a long time. Money seems to rule the roost on my picks.
All right, John, is money number 1 in your book too?
Yeah, to be a little bit different here, one thing I will say is a lot of this is contingent on what we talked about earlier, the house settlement and how it breaks down. Because if fair market value really is going to be like adjudicated very tightly and it's going to kind of even the playing field, then this becomes different. And maybe like recruiting is back up there at number 1. You go back to like a traditional kind of recruiting element to play here. Like everybody's sort of in the same ballpark in terms of what they can offer. So how are you as an actual recruiter at building relationships and making somebody want to play for you? As it stands, with that still sort of being ambiguous, I put coaching like a 1A, 1B just over NIL, and so much of this is like all tied together. But I've got a little different perspective on this. Now, I still think Jerome Tang is a better coach than maybe his actual reputation is right now. But look, I just watched K-State spend top 5 money on a basketball roster this past year and missed the NCAA tournament. So it doesn't guarantee you, the happiness that you seek there, right? When I say money can't buy happiness, it can't buy an NCAA tournament appearance necessarily either. And with Texas Tech, like that'll be really interesting to see how that works out with their number 1 transfer portal class this year. Is that going to get them a Big 12 championship with them really looking to take the next step? We'll see. You've got to have coaching that goes along with it. So to me, they're kind of like 1A, 1B. And then it's like recruiting fits in there somewhere. I guess you still have to be a good recruiter. I don't think it's just in all these cases top NIL offer bringing every single kid home, so that certainly can't help. I would say I had facilities last, and I would in front of that merely because of the conference prestige is why I would have that at 4 ahead of facilities, just because I do still think, especially as we get more and more of a separation created in this Power 2 world that we're living in, the SEC and Big Ten logos carry a lot of weight. Really, probably the SEC more than anything else. Honestly, the Big Ten, it's like they've got those 4 or 5 big brands at the top, and that's really what's doing the heavy lifting there more than the Big Ten logo. That SEC logo, though, I do still think that really means something to a lot of kids across the country. So I'll put that above facilities for that reason.
Okay. Well, obviously, for me, money is still number one because what has sports basically evolved into? All about the money. So I think that's kind of where I sit on that. I put recruiting too because I think that's tied hand in hand with the money these days. It pains me to have coaching as number 3. I mean, I would in my heart I would like that to be the first thing, but I don't think that is quite as important anymore. I had facilities 4 and the conference legacy thing 5. Interesting, the point you bring about the SEC. There, John, is they are known. And when we talked about Brett Yormark earlier, how he's looking for sponsorships and was potentially even looking at, we're going to call this the blank Big 12, and you think about the SEC, I think about Home Depot, right? Because, Home Depot has such a huge amount of sponsorship in there. And that's kind of interesting in how I think about that conference. But I think as time goes on, the conference legacy thing, outside of that, the top 2 conferences, you look at Alabama, it's not going to have the same legacy as it did with Nick Saban. That's going to trend back to, more middle of the road, in my opinion. But it is pretty interesting where all that lands as far as that. So, let's move to our Nightcaps segment. So each of our panelists gets a chance to deliver a monologue on any topic of their choosing. It doesn't even have to be about sports, really. 30 seconds, 2 minutes, however you want to roll with that. So, Matt, how about you? Lead us off on that.
I'm going to give a very probably unpopular opinion tonight. And my opinion is, I think since the College Football Playoff Committee and the commissioners and everyone working on this should stick with 12 teams. I think we should just stay with where we're at right now. These guys get together and they can't figure out how to get, a possible 16-team, playoff model together. We were on 4-4-2-2-2. We're going to go 5 + 11. They're throwing out all this and that and everything. My opinion is let's just stay at 12. Let's just keep this at where we're at right now. And let's kind of sit down and continue to work this out. It's frustrating for me, and I mean, I'm sure for everyone else who covers it, to have to keep writing every week or every month or so about how this commissioner said this about this model, or this commissioner said that, or the coaches want this model, or the ADs want that model. And after a while, it's frustrating for fans to really believe that no one can get on the same page. No one can find a way to say, okay, this is what we want to do. We're 4 or 5 months away before them having to basically come to the decision on this. And we're still no closer than we were, a year ago when we were just bringing this up. So my feeling right now is to stay at 12 and keep doing the seeding, or with the new seeding like they talked about. And I love the home games, the home playoff first round games. I think they should still continue to do that. But I think we should just go with this format for a while. Then we'll see what happens if they can finally get together and get on the same page to establish a new format.
Yeah, like how many years have they done 12-team playoff? 1? It's like we don't have any trends to look at here. All right, John.
Yeah, on the playoff, I'll piggyback on the playoff discussion here because I've been talking about this a lot lately. The discussion right now does center on this stalemate where the Big Ten really wants the 4-4-2-2 with 4 auto bids for both the Big Ten and the SEC. The Big 12, it was actually reported that Brett Yormark was the first one to bring to the table the 5 + 11. Jim Phillips and the ACC, they jumped on board, and basically everybody else now is pushing for 5 + 11, including the SEC, because their coaches really like that idea. Namely, avoiding play-in games on championship weekend at the end of the year that would just put extra wear and tear on their players' tires, extra tread on the tires, so to speak. I just want to make the point here, like Josh Pate, Joel Klatt, a lot of national voices have really taken fire at the Big 12 for that, saying, hey, what are you doing? Like, the 5+11 plan a lot of years could result in like 5 or 6 SEC or Big 10 teams to your 1, whereas you could lock down 2 spots at least with this 4-4-2-2. And I totally understand that. I had that opinion for a while, but now that I'm seeing the fight kind of gotten where the Big 12 is coming from here, it's just about not solidifying that you are lesser than and not writing it in pen yourself. You're putting a cap on what you can be as a league long term. And while it seems like really far-fetched that you could ever make up much ground on the Big 10 or the SEC, I think you still got to let that ride. And it may cause some short-term pain. I mean, it may be worse for them if it really does wind up being 5+11. It may be worse for the Big 12 in the short term in terms of how many bids they're going to get versus others. I mean, we saw BYU probably should have been in the top 16 last year. They weren't. And so most years you may only get one team in. But I do stand with Yormark on the fact that, like, I'm not going to be the one that writes down, hey, we are half of the SEC and Big 10. Every single point you go to negotiate from that point forward, like a new TV contract, it's going to start at, well, we're not going a dollar higher than half of what the SEC and Big 10 get, for instance. So I think the Big 12 is between a rock and a hard place on that discussion, but I really understand where Brett Yormark is coming from. I think it's a pretty principled stance that he and Jim Phillips with the ACC have, and I do wish that there was a little bit more in terms of the national guys, like acknowledging that like that does take some real guts to kind of stand your ground there and not take the 2 bids that were on the table.
All right, Eric, what's your nightcap?
I'm going to talk about the NCAA and amateurism. If amateurism is indeed dead, and it seems we're trending that direction, the NCAA has no one to blame but themselves. And let's just take a look back, because it's easy to point the finger at athletes and say that they're greedy or, they're wanting money. It's all about money. Let's just rewind for a minute, okay? Let's not forget this whole thing started when the O'Bannon brothers saw themselves in an NCAA video game and simply said, well, how can you have a UCLA player 31 with a shaved head who is not me? Had the NCAA just decided to say, hey, you're right, let's find some sort of structure and give these guys a couple dollars, you wouldn't have ended up 20 years down the road, even more, where we are now. So that's the first thing. Now, secondly, if the game in amateurism is dead and it feels different, let's start here. Talking with Steve Sarkisian, he says, and he's adamant about this, that he believes that student athletes still want to feel like student athletes. And I believe that to be partially true. I'm sure Arch Manning doesn't want to have him, be followed around by us or by students. He wants to just be a normal college kid. But with the amount of money that comes with college sports, things are going to happen. That's step one. Step two, I'm sure he wants to feel like a college athlete, because if a college athlete doesn't feel like answering a question after dropping a pass or fumbling the ball, they can hide behind the SID, being their student athlete. Well, when we get to the aspect of this being an employee and employer, and especially in the case of a Kansas State or a UCF or a Texas, a state employee, you're not going to have that veil, that area to kind of hide behind. And here's the last point I'll make about, the employee-employer dynamic that I'm sure Steve Sarkisian, and I believe Steve is being inherently honest when he says that I think he has the best interests of kids, right? I do genuinely think he still is in the business of trying to shape, 17 to 23-year-olds. However, there's a dynamic that probably isn't being talked about enough, okay? There's going to be a time when a player makes more than their position coach, maybe even more than their head coach. And what's going to stop that player from saying, no, the power structure that was back in the day when Urban Meyer could rule with an iron fist, that's done. I now make as much money as you. I wield as much power as you. And what's to stop a college coach like a Steve Sarkisian from saying, why would I continue to coach college sports when in essence it is pro sports just without any regulation? So I would say to those who want to point the finger at student athletes, at being frustrated, amateurism being dead, and where we are now, you have to point the finger back at the NCAA.
All right, in my nightcap, I'm going to focus on the Women's College World Series. Of course, I've become a huge softball stan over the last few years, and I think it's finally great that Oklahoma did not five-peat. Now, while their multiple championships was great for the sport because they brought a lot of eyeballs, and you have to have that one team that kind of lifts up the sport. That was great, but now I think it's good that they did not repeat, just because that's when you start to get the fatigue in. We don't want the College World Series to become the Oklahoma Invitational. So that has all now changed with Texas claiming the national championship. Texas Tech was a great story. Najee Kennedy, of course, obviously with the NIL being a story, but she was a great performer and did her best there. And I really love Mike White, the coach of Texas. Hook 'em. He brings such a great flair and has such a great sense of humor. So kudos to the women's game. I think the one thing they need to fix is they need the championship series to take place over the weekend and not during the week. I think that's the next step that they need to take. Well, that concludes our nightcaps and also concludes this edition of To Your Point. For Eric Henry, Matt Murschel, and John Kurtz, I'm Jeff Allen. Thanks for joining us.